Hello. I thought I'd just let you know what's currently on the table. Not posted for a little while. Just recently I've picked up the new edition of Fire in the Sky by Phalanx games. I did own the original actually, which was produced by Multi-Man Publishing, and I sold that, not because I didn't like the game, but just because it was going for a good price. And I'd heard that there were rumours of a new edition coming down the track. So I thought, well, let's move on the old one, and be nice to get something new. Hopefully, it will incorporate all the errata. May get a bit of a graphic uplift. So I guess it's a bit of a punt. Wasn't too sure exactly what was going to be finally delivered, but this arrived a couple of weeks ago, and it's a good price. In the UK it's available for just over sort of 40 quid. This is about 42, I think, including delivery, which is actually less than I got for my old copy, which I think went to somewhere in Europe. And overall, I'm pretty pleased. It's gone from a map sheet to a map board. It's a nice sort of 6-panel map, a bit more muted than the old one, which not necessarily a bad thing. The other one was a bit glossy. There was a lot of artistic clouds incorporated into the artwork, which kind of detracted a bit from the clarity I felt. And they've gone for a more of a matte finish, sort of neutral grey palette, which we'll see in a while. So I think overall it's a plus on the map for me anyway. These things are very subjective ultimately, aren't they? But it works nicely. They changed the counter format in terms of everything used to be square. Now it's a combination of hexagons, circles and squares for the land forces, the naval units and the air assets. So that's quite nice. You can see very quickly what's what. The base capacities are similarly defined in hexagons, circles or squares, so you know exactly what they relate to. So that's another plus. I like the new counters. Had I have not seen the draft counters for in particular the Allied forces, and this has just arrived, I said, yeah, that's fine. They all look good. You've got some other icons on there to help with understanding what the various numbers mean. But there was also a link on I think it was Board Game Geek, which actually did show some of the earlier counters used for some of the playtesting. So it was sort of draft artwork, and I did prefer those. So if I could wave a wand and say, you've now got the earlier draft counters, have those, I'd be, oh, thanks very much. Because it was a slightly lighter palette of blue. Things were a little bit clearer, I felt. At least that's how it looked on the computer screen. These things can always be a little bit hard to tell exactly what they look like in the flesh. But these are more than functional. Some people have said, "Oh, I'm going to use the counters from my old game and don't like the new ones." And well, you can if you like, but just be aware that the transport costs have all changed. So you'll be doing a bit more mental arithmetic and gymnastics to if you wish to use some of the old hardware. Because one of the things that I found a little bit not so much tricky, but just fiddly, I suppose, would be the way to say it, is that in the old in the old system, some of the units had a transport rating of 0.5. So typically the destroyer naval units were 0.5s, and the Japanese used and still use oil for the operations, and if it's above a certain range, it's 1.5 times the transport costs. So now we're getting on to 0.75s and 0.25s, and at the end of each phase you had to round down. So if I've used sort of, I don't know, three and a quarter oil points for argument's sake, that would leave me something and 3/4 left, and I'd be aware that I'm about to lose that. So you'd be scratching your head, how can I do something useful to try and use up that 0.75? Why you couldn't just retain the fractions as a count. You used to have to rotate the marker, once for 0.25, twice for 0.5, 3 times for 0.75. You could just house rule that you could just keep any retained fractions for the next turn, I guess. But what they've done in the new version is that essentially things have been doubled. So the destroyers are now 1 transport point. If you're moving more than 4 hexes, you do have a 1.5 factor on that, but you do just round up for that task force. So if you're moving a task force and it's 5.5 transport points, that's 6. So that there's no 3/4 and quarters. So to me that's another plus. I'm pleased that was done. Save the aging, greying matter from struggling too much. Can't really think of many negatives. I mean, if I was a games company and I was going to release a new version of a game and I had sufficient time, and I would argue that there has been for this, it certainly hasn't been rushed through, which is a good thing. I think one of the things I would do is I would ensure that I had scoured the available forums and websites for all known available errata, and I would make an effort to include that in the new release. And one of the things that struck me playing through this for the first time was that the American battleships that were damaged at Pearl, which in the original game were due to come back on turn 3, were errata to arrive on turn 4. They felt that was more of a reasonable representation of the amount of damage that they would have suffered in the Pearl Harbor raid. So if you go into Consume World for the last, 10 years or something, at the top of the forum it says, errata version 1.1, American battleships arrive turn 4, not turn 3. So when you get your nicely produced books, and there's 2 of them, one for the rules and one for the scenarios, with a very good example of play, a multi-page example of play covering all different types of combats and operations. So that's very well done. But in the scenario book, there is the main scenario: 3 battleships arriving from being damaged, arrive getting turn 3. So I questioned it and thought, well, maybe they've backtracked on that. But sure enough, no, it's turn 4. It's errata. It's not rocket science to check that stuff. I mean, I did do rocket science for quite a few years, and that's a pretty simple thing, just to sort of spend an hour going through a few known locations of places where you're going to find errata. So that's a bit sloppy. So they're getting the tick box of being a bit sloppy there. But and the only other query was the handling of replacements in the game. In the MMP version, a replacement counter has got one step, so they're like change. You could pick a four replacement counter to try and flip back, or to repair, if you like, an army that had been flipped from 8 to 4. If you can get it 4 replacements, it'll flip back to its full strength. And it was treated as a one-step unit. So attempting to land, if it took 3 steps, it was fine. It would need the 4th step to actually eliminate the counter, which made them pretty tough. And would need a concerted effort from the enemy submarines and air assets to try and do enough hits to essentially sink the reinforcing and replacement units. Well, in the new game, it just says that a replacement unit, if it suffers hits equal to its flip side, which is essentially half of the big number, so a replacement of 4 has got 2 on its flip side. If it suffers 2 hits, it becomes damaged, and furthermore, any damaged replacement counter gets eliminated. So essentially, they've reduced the number of hits by a factor of 2. Again, a query to that one, and they did say that there was a sentence missing off the rule, but actually on reflection they prefer the way the rule now is, and I'm inclined to agree with that. They did seem to be very hard to turn back, whereas a normal land unit, if it got damaged whilst trying to land, it wasn't allowed to land. Whereas now, that also applies equally to any replacements. I suppose I could maybe argue that if it flips over to a 2, it can still land, because if it started as a 2 and wasn't hit at all, it could still land. So a 4 flipped to a 2, you could argue, well, why can't that still land? Because if it was an unscathed 2 strength replacement unit, it would be allowed to land, so why can't a flip 4 one land? And I would argue that I don't see why it can't. Of course, it may not be able to do what the mission was, to flip back an army, because an army would need 4 landing replacements, because they only last for the turn. You only get the one chance to refit the army, so you couldn't land a 2 one turn and then a 2 the next turn, and then build up enough to get your army back. But it would mean if you were trying to flip a division of strength 4, flip to its reduced 2 side, you could try and land extra replacements, say a 4. If it was flipped to a 2, it could still land and then be able to fill the ranks of the depleted division. I think that's probably quite a nice sort of house rule, which I may implement. I'm due to play this actually on Tuesday with a guy who I believe is about to join Phalanx games, so that'll be quite interesting. So we're going to try it on the old Vassal module. So there'll be a bit of going back to the counting of quarters and 3/4, but it's a way to just make sure that we've got the game down. He's a big fan of Empire of the Sun, I think, and it's very, very keen to compare. The game itself is, in essence, not that complicated. So the rulebook, which, including everything, stretches to 20 pages. But the optional rules start on page 17. So there's actually 16 pages of rules. So this is not a heavy. It's not a heavy game. But the rules are different There's quite a long sequence of play. The combat's involved, which I believe it should feel a bit involved, because you've got the submarine threat, the anti-submarine warfare, the air-to-air, trying to get air supremacy or air superiority. Then you've got amphibious landings, or you've got land combat in sort of Rangoon and Burma. So there's quite a lot to cover, and it takes a little while. It took me a few turns just to get back to where I was when I used to play it. So I'm on turn 7 now of the 16 turn main event, and things are now clicking. So I feel pretty comfortable with the game and the system as a whole. And I am reminded what a nice game it is. I mean, I think for 40 odd quid it's an absolute bargain. No game is ever wartless, and there's a couple of minor little niggles that I've mentioned, but by no means a showstopper. So I'm very pleased to have it back in my collection. I'll show you a map, the map and the current state of play, just so you get a feel for what the new combination looks like of map and counters. So I'll stand back a bit and you'll get an idea of the total range of the map. You can see what I mean by the matte, so the matte bluey grey, which I quite like. I find it pretty easy on the eye, and the combinations of hexagonal, round and square counters for the air, naval and land units respectively. You see here we've had some fighting. We're currently the Japanese 25th Army, I think that is just trying to push into Burma. They captured Rangoon. Calcutta is worth 3 victory points. Those are the stars, which you can see under the place names. So those are the big targets. The sort of 3s are quite important. So Rangoon's fallen already, but that's only worth 1. So the sources of oil are the same. So you have Surabaya, Singapore and Brunei. You can see the little oil symbol. Those were 4 apiece, they're now 8 apiece, because essentially everything's been doubled to mean that we've been able to drop some of those annoying fractions. Japanese homelands, there's a couple of off-map boxes to relieve a bit of stacking. The Japanese in my game have been able to come down and capture Ley and Hollandia. Port Moresby fell, but that's a pretty heavy cost to the Japanese naval aviation. They lost a couple of carriers, so that'll come back to bite them. Guadalcanal is just there. So, Guadalcanal is still held by there's a Marine Division. The 2nd Marine Division is there now, trying to hold on to that, and there is also an aircraft carrier task force based in Fiji, which is easily within range of Guadalcanal. One of the ways you can get victory points is if you can isolate Australia from America. So Espirito Santo, if they can get air units into there, they could potentially cut off Australia from the US coast, and that's worth 2 VPs, and we're currently at 36, and it's 40 for the, as you can see, the automatic victory. So one for Guadalcanal and one for Espirito Santo, and isolating Australia would be enough for the win. And similarly, if they can push onto Calcutta, and that's another path to victory. But the Americans are pushing back a bit. They've just recaptured Wake Island. In fact, that's an occupied base marker. That's now a fully owned US base, and that allows them an entry into the Gilberts or into the Marshalls. You've got to be within 2 hexes of a friendly base if you wish to amphibiously invade. So that opens the door to other threats. And there's plenty of assets on the US mainland, and here's Pearl Harbor. That's the Pearl Harbor holding box, and of course that's worth lots of points, but that's pretty impregnable now. So yeah, it all looks nice. There's a new don't know how much this you'll be able to see, but that's the battle box where you deploy your task forces, determine air points, and you can have a carry task force or bombardment task forces, which some of which will need to go in to try and get sea control to allow for amphibious invasions. But yeah, nice job overall. Well done, Phalanx. Pretty pleased.